Thunder cracked across the darkening Montana sky as Abigail Norton clutched her 3-month-old daughter, Emma, tighter to her chest. The wagon wheels broken spokes, mocking her desperate situation. The year was 1876, and her husband James had promised her a better life out west than what they'd left behind in Boston, not abandonment in the middle of nowhere, as a storm threatened to swallow them whole. The rain began as angry droplets, quickly transforming into sheets of water that drenched Abigail's calico dress and soaked through the thin blanket protecting Emma. The baby whimpered against her mother's chest, tiny fingers curling against the wet fabric. "Hush now, little one," Abigail whispered, her voice trembling. "We'll be all right." She didn't believe her own words. The wagon train had continued without them when James hadn't returned from his hunting expedition 2 days prior. The wagon master couldn't risk the entire train for one woman and her child, especially with Indians reported in the area and the threatening weather rolling in. She'd begged them to wait just one more day, but fear and practicality had won out. "Your husband's likely dead, madam," the wagon master had told her with uncomfortable directness. "If he ain't back by now, he ain't coming back. You're welcome to stay with us, but we can't delay any more." Abigail had refused to believe James was gone. She'd chosen to wait for him, a decision she now bitterly regretted as thunder rumbled overhead and the wind picked up speed, whistling through the tall grass around her. The broken wagon wouldn't offer much shelter, but it was all she had. She climbed inside, using the canvas covering to create a makeshift shelter for herself and Emma. Miles away, Kieran Irwin pulled his hat lower against the driving rain. The 30-year-old rancher had been tracking a mountain lion that had been killing his cattle when the storm hit. His stallion, Thunderbolt, was growing skittish with each lightning strike, but Kieran knew these parts well enough to find shelter. There was an outcropping of rocks not far off that would give them some protection until the worst passed. He spurred his horse forward, squinting through the rain. That's when he saw it, the silhouette of a wagon standing alone on the prairie, miles from any trail or settlement. No smoke rose from a campfire. No horses were hitched to the wagon. Something was very wrong. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Thunderbolt as they approached cautiously. Kieran's hand rested on the Colt revolver at his hip, a habit born from years in territory where danger could come from any direction. The wagon's back wheel was clearly broken, the canvas cover partially collapsed on one side. "Hello, the wagon," he called out, raising his voice above the howl of the wind. "Anyone there?" Inside, Abigail froze, clutching Emma tighter. The baby had finally fallen into a fitful sleep, and the unfamiliar male voice sent a spike of both hope and fear through Abigail. Was it James? A rescue party? Or something worse? "Who's there?" she called back, her voice shaking. Kieran dismounted, leading Thunderbolt closer. "Name's Kieran Irwin. I own the Circle K ranch about 10 miles east of here. I'm not looking for trouble, madam, just saw your wagon and thought you might need help." Abigail hesitated before pushing aside the canvas and peering out. The rain had plastered her auburn hair to her face, and she brushed it away with one hand while keeping Emma secure with the other. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a duster darkened by rain. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see a strong jaw covered in stubble and concerned blue eyes. "I'm Abigail Norton," she said. "This is my daughter Emma. Our wagon train left us behind when my husband didn't return from hunting. The wheel broke as the last wagon pulled away." Kieran's expression darkened. "They left a woman and baby alone out here with a storm coming." The disbelief in his voice was matched only by the anger. "That ain't right." Another crash of thunder made Emma stir and begin to cry. Abigail tried to soothe her, but the baby was cold and hungry. "You can't stay here," Kieran said definitively. "My ranch isn't far. You'll have shelter, food, and dry clothes." Abigail bit her lip. "My husband might come back if we leave." "Madam," Kieran said gently, "if he's tracking back to this spot, he'll have to wait out this storm too. No man can track in this. But I promise you, once the weather clears, I'll help you look for him or get word to the nearest town." The sincerity in his eyes convinced her. With the rain coming down harder and the temperature dropping, Abigail knew Emma wouldn't survive the night in these conditions. "All right," she agreed, "but I need to bring some things." Kieran nodded and helped her gather what little she could carry: a small carpet bag with Emma's clothes, a locket containing a miniature portrait of her parents, and a well-worn Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything else would have to stay behind. When she was ready, Kieran helped her mount Thunderbolt, then handed Emma up to her. The baby was fully awake now, her wails nearly lost in the roaring wind. Kieran swung up behind Abigail, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his other hand. "Hold on tight to that little one," he instructed, turning the horse toward home. The ride was harrowing. The storm intensified, lightning splitting the sky in jagged streaks that temporarily blinded them. The rain fell in such torrents that at times Kieran could barely see the trail ahead. But Thunderbolt was sure-footed and familiar with the route home, and Kieran's arm remained steady around Abigail's waist, a reassuring presence in the chaos. After what seemed like hours but was probably less than one, the silhouette of buildings appeared through the curtain of rain. The Circle K ranch was modest but well-built, with a main house, a barn, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings. Light glowed from the windows of the main house, a beacon in the stormy darkness. As they approached, the front door flew open, and an older woman hurried out onto the covered porch, a lantern held high. "Kieran, thank the Lord," she called. Then, spotting Abigail and Emma, "Mercy me, you've brought company." Kieran dismounted and reached up for Emma first, then helped Abigail down. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from the ride and weak from fear and exhaustion. "Mrs. Holden, this is Mrs. Norton and her daughter Emma," Kieran explained, ushering them toward the house. Their wagon broke down and the train left them behind. "Mrs. Norton, this is Mrs. Martha Holden, my housekeeper and the best cook in the territory." The older woman's kind face creased with concern. Left behind, with a baby, good heavens! She immediately took charge, bustling them inside. "Let's get you both warm and dry before anything else. The poor little mite is soaked through." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. A fire blazed welcomingly, and Abigail nearly wept at the sight of it. "I'll take care of the horse," Kieran said, tipping his hat before heading back out into the storm. Mrs. Holden led Abigail to a bedroom off the main room. "You can change in here, dear. I'll find something dry for both of you." Within half an hour, Abigail found herself sitting before the fire in a borrowed dress that was slightly too large but blessedly dry, with Emma wrapped in soft flannel blankets, nursing contentedly. Mrs. Holden had prepared hot coffee and stew, insisting that Abigail eat to keep up her strength. When Kieran returned, he changed into dry clothes as well as a clean flannel shirt and denim trousers. His hair, still damp, was a rich brown that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Storm's getting worse," he reported, accepting the coffee Mrs. Holden offered. "You're lucky I found you when I did, Mrs. Norton. Please call me Abigail," she said softly. "And yes, I believe you may have saved our lives. I don't know how to thank you." Kieran's smile was warm but somewhat reserved. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Abigail said, thinking of the wagon master who had left her behind. Not everyone would risk themselves in a storm for strangers. Kieran seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude. You and the little one can stay here until we find your husband or figure out what to do next. I've got plenty of room. Abigail nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. James might be dead. She was alone with an infant in a territory she barely knew, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. Tomorrow, if the weather clears, I'll ride out with some of my hands to look for any sign of your husband, Kieran promised. And I can send word to Fort Benton about the wagon train leaving you behind. That kind of behavior shouldn't go unreported. Thank you, Abigail whispered, looking down at Emma, who had fallen asleep after nursing. I'm afraid I've put you to a great deal of trouble. No trouble at all, Kieran assured her, though his eyes held a wariness that Abigail couldn't quite interpret. Mrs. Holden will show you to the guest room when you're ready. Get some rest. As he turned to go, Abigail caught a glimpse of a long scar that ran from just below his right ear down into his collar. It was an old wound, well healed but clearly the result of serious injury. She wondered what other scars, visible and invisible, this cowboy carried. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in months, Abigail allowed herself to cry quietly. She cried for James, for the dreams they'd shared, for the future that now seemed so uncertain. Emma slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle Mrs. Holden had created from a drawer lined with blankets. Eventually, exhaustion claimed Abigail, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning brought clear skies, and the realization that the storm had been even worse than it had seemed. Abigail stood on the porch, Emma in her arms, watching as Kieran and 3 other men prepared to ride out in search of James. The damage to the land was evident: trees down, new gullies carved by rushing water, and debris scattered across the normally neat ranch yard. We'll head back to where I found you first, Kieran explained as he tightened Thunderbolt's cinch. Then fan out from there. If your husband made it through the storm, he'd likely try to get back to the wagon. Abigail nodded, her throat tight. He's a good man, a teacher by training. This journey was his idea. He had a position waiting in a new settlement near Helena. Kieran's expression was carefully neutral. A teacher, you say? Not much of a hunter or outdoorsman? No, Abigail admitted. This was his first time out west. We both have a lot to learn. Kieran exchanged glances with his foreman, an older man named Frank Carter. The look conveyed what neither wanted to say aloud. A city man with little experience in the wilderness had slim chances of surviving long enough to be found. We'll do our best, Mrs. Norton, Frank assured her kindly. The men rode out, leaving Abigail to help Mrs. Holden with household tasks. The older woman was a font of practical knowledge and gentle wisdom, showing Abigail how to use the wood stove properly and teaching her to make biscuits that didn't turn out like rocks, something Abigail had struggled with on the trail. How long have you worked for Mr. Irwin? Abigail asked as they kneaded dough side by side. Going on 8 years now, Mrs. Holden replied. Came out here with my husband to help Kieran's father run the place. When old Mr. Irwin passed on 4 years back and my Arthur followed the next year, Kieran asked me to stay on. He's been like a son to me. Has he never married? Abigail asked, then blushed at her own boldness. Mrs. Holden's expression turned sad. There was a girl once. Sarah was her name. They were engaged to be married when the war broke out. Kieran joined up with the Union cavalry. When he came back 4 years later, he learned she'd married another while he was gone, a banker from Helena who'd stayed home during the fighting. How awful for him, Abigail murmured. It changed him, Mrs. Holden continued. He was always quiet, but after that, he kept more to himself. Threw himself into building up the ranch. He's done well. The Circle K is one of the most prosperous spreads in these parts, but sometimes I worry he's forgotten there's more to life than work. The men returned at dusk, tired and grim-faced. Kieran found Abigail in the garden behind the house, where she'd been hanging diapers to dry while Emma napped in her makeshift cradle nearby. "Any sign of him?" she asked, already knowing the answer from Kieran's expression. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I'm sorry, Abigail. We found no trace of your husband. We did find where your wagon had been abandoned, but the storm washed away any tracks that might have been there." Abigail nodded slowly, struggling to maintain her composure. "What about the wagon train? Any way to catch up to them?" "They've got at least a 4-day head start, and they'll be moving faster than we could with a baby," Kieran explained gently. "I've sent Frank to Fort Benton with a message. The Army might be able to get word to them at their next scheduled stop." "I see." Abigail's voice was barely audible. "We'll keep looking for your husband," Kieran promised. "Tomorrow we'll try a different direction, and in the meantime, you and Emma are welcome to stay here as long as needed." "You're very kind," Abigail said, finally meeting his eyes, "but I can't impose indefinitely. I have no way to pay you for your hospitality." Kieran shook his head firmly. "This isn't about payment, Mrs. Norton. This is about doing what's right." The days stretched into a week, then 2. The search parties continued but found no sign of James Norton. Frank returned from Fort Benton with news that the wagon train had been intercepted with a message, but none claimed responsibility for abandoning Abigail. The wagon master had apparently told the others that the Nortons had chosen to stay behind and try to establish themselves rather than continue to Helena. "Cowards," Kieran muttered when Frank reported this. "Leaving a woman and child to die, then lying about it." Abigail found herself settling into a routine at the Circle K. She helped Mrs. Holden with cooking and household tasks, tended to Emma, and even began assisting with the kitchen garden, which had suffered some damage in the storm. The ranch hands, initially awkward around her, gradually accepted her presence, tipping their hats respectfully when they saw her, and sometimes bringing small gifts for Emma: a carved wooden rattle from Frank, a tiny pair of moccasins from Louis, the Mexican vaquero. Kieran remained somewhat distant, though unfailingly polite. He spent long days working with the cattle, training horses, or riding the boundaries of his property. But in the evenings, he often sat on the porch with Abigail after supper, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing a comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains. "You have a beautiful home," Abigail remarked one evening, 3 weeks after her arrival. Emma was asleep inside, and the air was filled with the scent of wildflowers. "Thank you," Kieran replied. "My father claimed this land right after the war with Mexico, built it up from nothing." Pride was evident in his voice. "I was born in that house. Never really knew any other home except during the war years." "You must have seen terrible things," Abigail said softly, glancing at the scar on his neck. Kieran's hand moved unconsciously to touch it. "Got this at Antietam. Confederate cavalrymen nearly took my head off. I was luckier than many." "My father and brother fought too," Abigail shared. "Father came home, but my brother Robert died at Gettysburg." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The war changed everything for everyone." "Yes," Abigail agreed. "It's why James was so eager to come west. He said the East was full of ghosts and bitter memories. Out here, we could start fresh." "And what did you want?" Kieran asked, surprising her with the directness of the question. Abigail considered this. "I wanted James to be happy again. After he came home from the war, he was different. Restless, haunted. When he spoke of going west, he smiled for the first time in years. How could I say no?" "But what did you want for yourself?" Kieran persisted. I wanted. Abigail paused, realizing she'd never really asked herself that question. I wanted a home, children, security. The things most women want, I suppose. Kieran's gaze was thoughtful. Those aren't small things, Abigail. They're the most important things of all. As the weeks passed, Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to Kieran. She admired his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of responsibility, and the gentle way he interacted with Emma, who had begun to smile and coo whenever he entered a room. But she was still a married woman, and the possibility that James might still be alive, however remote, kept her from acknowledging these growing feelings. A month after her arrival at the Circle K, everything changed. Frank returned from a supply run to town with a letter addressed to Abigail. The handwriting was unfamiliar. It came to the general store, Frank explained. Postmarked from Helena. With trembling hands, Abigail opened the letter. As she read, the color drained from her face. Abigail, Kieran stood from his desk where he'd been working on accounts. What is it? It's from a woman named Clara Wilkes, Abigail said, her voice strangely calm. She says she's James's wife, that they've been married for 2 years and have a son together in Helena, she says. Abigail's voice broke. She says he abandoned her to return east on some pretense, and now she's learned he took another wife there and was bringing her west. She wants to know if I'm that woman. The silence in the room was deafening. Mrs. Holden made a small sound of distress, while Frank muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. Kieran crossed the room and gently took the letter from Abigail's hands. After reading it, his jaw tightened. The man you were traveling with, James Norton, was a bigamist, he said flatly. He married you without divorcing his first wife. Abigail nodded numbly. It seems so. And now he's gone, perhaps dead, and I'm... She looked up at Kieran, shock and realization dawning in her eyes. I was never truly his wife at all, was I? Not in the eyes of the law, Kieran confirmed gently. Abigail's face crumpled and she buried it in her hands. Years of memories flashed through her mind: the courtship, the wedding, their life together in Boston, the journey west. Had it all been a lie? Had James ever loved her, or had she simply been convenient? And what of Emma? She was certainly James's child, the resemblance was unmistakable, but she was now, in essence, illegitimate. I'm so sorry, dear, Mrs. Holden said, putting an arm around Abigail's shoulders. What am I to do now? Abigail whispered, I have no husband, no home, no means to support Emma. You have a home right here for as long as you need it, Kieran stated firmly. Nothing has changed in that regard, but everything had changed and everyone knew it. Abigail was not a widow waiting for news of her missing husband. She was an unmarried mother who had been deceived and abandoned. In the eyes of society, her position was now scandalous. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Abigail sat alone at the kitchen table, rereading Clara's letter by lamplight. The woman's tone was not accusatory, but rather one of shared betrayal. She had included her address in Helena, inviting Abigail to write back if she wished. Kieran found her there, still awake long past midnight. He'd come for a glass of water and paused in the doorway, watching her for a moment before she noticed him. You should try to rest, he said softly. I can't, Abigail replied. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face and I try to find some sign that he was lying to me all along. How did I not know? Kieran pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Some men are skilled at deception. It's not your fault, Abigail. I feel such a fool, she admitted. All those weeks waiting for him, hoping he'd return, and now to find out he had another family waiting for him elsewhere. What will you do about the other woman, Clara? Abigail looked down at the letter. I'll write to her. She deserves to know what happened, that James is likely dead. And perhaps, she hesitated, Perhaps someday Emma should know her half-brother. They share the same blood after all. Kieran nodded, impressed by her grace in such difficult circumstances. You're a remarkable woman, Abigail Norton. Not Norton, she corrected softly. My maiden name was Nash. Abigail Nash, I suppose I should use that again. Abigail Nash, Kieran repeated as if testing how it sounded. It suits you better anyway. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Thank you, Kieran, for everything. I don't know what would have become of Emma and me if you hadn't found us that day. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them. The barriers that had kept Kieran distant her marriage, her search for James, were suddenly gone. There was only a man and a woman, both wounded by past betrayals, both cautious but increasingly drawn to each other. The next day, Kieran found Abigail hanging laundry in the yard. Emma was nearby in a wooden cradle that Lewis had crafted for her, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. I've been thinking, Kieran said without preamble. The school in town lost their teacher last month. Influenza. They're looking for someone new before winter sets in. You mentioned your husband James was a teacher by training. Did he teach you? Abigail paused, a wet shirt in her hands. I was a teacher before I married him, in Boston, for 3 years at a girls' academy. Kieran's eyebrows rose. You never mentioned that. You never asked, she replied simply, and it seemed unimportant on the trail west. James was to be the teacher in Helena, I was to be the wife and mother. Would you consider teaching here? Kieran asked. The town's small but growing. The pay's not much, but it would give you independence. And you and Emma could continue to stay here at the ranch. It's only a 3-mile ride to town. You could use one of my gentler mares. Abigail stared at him. You do that for me. Help me establish myself here. I would, Kieran confirmed. If that's what you want. What I want, Abigail echoed, remembering their conversation on the porch. Yes, I think I would like that very much. Thank you, Kieran. The town council was initially hesitant about hiring an unmarried mother as a teacher. But Kieran's influence as one of the area's most prosperous ranchers, combined with Abigail's obvious education and capability, won them over. By September, Abigail was teaching 15 children of various ages in the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. She discovered she loved teaching even more in this setting than she had in Boston. The children were eager to learn, their parents appreciative of her efforts. She rode to town each morning with Emma securely wrapped against her chest, taught until mid-afternoon, then returned to the Circle K where Mrs. Holden would take the baby while Abigail helped prepare the evening meal. Kieran often arranged his work to be near the house when she returned, casually appearing to help her dismount or take her satchel of books. These brief moments of contact, his hands at her waist, the brush of fingers as he took her burden, sent thrills of awareness through Abigail that both excited and frightened her. After James's deception, she had promised herself she would be more cautious with her heart. But Kieran was nothing like James. Where James had been charming and talkative, Kieran was reserved but sincere. Where James had made grand promises, Kieran simply acted, proving his character through deeds rather than words. And while James had kept secrets, Kieran's life was an open book to anyone who cared to look his ranch, his reputation in the community, his past. The change in seasons brought cattle roundups and preparations for winter. Abigail found herself fully integrated into ranch life, helping to preserve garden harvests, learning to make soap and candles from Mrs. Holden, and continuing her teaching in town. Emma thrived, growing plump and happy, beginning to roll over and sit up with support. One evening in late October, Abigail found Kieran on the porch after supper, smoking a rare cigarette as he gazed at the stars. The night was crisp but not yet cold, the sky a brilliant canvas of stars. "Emma's asleep," Abigail said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she joined him. "She's growing fast," Kieran observed. "Going to be walking before you know it." Abigail smiled. "Yes, she's already trying to crawl, gets up on her hands and knees and rocks back and forth." They stood in companionable silence for a while until Kieran finally spoke. "Winter's coming. The passes will be closing soon." "Yes," Abigail agreed. "The children are excited for snow. Many of my lessons have been somewhat ignored lately in favor of watching out the windows for the first flakes." Kieran chuckled, then grew serious again. "I've been thinking about your situation, Abigail." She turned to face him, curious. "My situation? You've been here almost 4 months now. You've established yourself as the town teacher. You're well respected, but—" He hesitated. "But I'm still living in your home with no formal arrangement or relationship," Abigail finished for him. "You're concerned about propriety." "Not for myself," Kieran clarified quickly, "but for your reputation and Emma's future." Abigail nodded slowly. "I've thought about it too. Perhaps I should look for a small place in town. With my teacher's salary, I might be able to afford something modest." "That's not what I meant," Kieran said, facing her fully now. "Abigail, I'm not a man of many words, never have been, but I need to say this plainly." He took a deep breath. "I care for you and for Emma. These past months having you here, it's made this place feel like a real home again. I know it might seem soon, considering everything you've been through, but I'd like to court you properly. With the intention of marriage, if you'll have me." Abigail's breath caught in her throat. She'd suspected Kieran's feelings mirrored her own, but hearing him express them so directly still caught her by surprise. "Kieran, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted. "I know you've had reason to be cautious with your trust. I just wanted you to know my intentions." "Thank you for your honesty," Abigail said softly, "and for giving me time. But I don't need it. These past months have shown me your character in ways words never could. You took in 2 strangers during a storm without hesitation. You've provided for us, respected me, helped me find a path forward. You've never asked for anything in return." She stepped closer to him. "I would be honored to be courted by you, Kieran Irwin." The smile that spread across his face transformed him, erasing years of solitude and reserve. Hesitantly, he reached for her hand, and when she gave it, he brought it to his lips in a gentle kiss. "May I call on you tomorrow evening?" he asked formally, a twinkle in his eye. Abigail laughed. "I believe that can be arranged, considering I'll be right here." Their courtship, though somewhat unusual given that they already lived under the same roof, proceeded with proper decorum. Kieran began taking Abigail on proper outings to town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, on picnics when weather permitted, to church services on Sundays where they sat together with Emma, causing a stir of interested gossip among the townsfolk. Mrs. Holden watched these developments with obvious approval, often finding reasons to take Emma for an hour or two to give the couple some privacy. The ranch hands, too, seemed pleased, particularly Frank, who had known Kieran the longest and had worried about his solitary existence. Winter arrived with a vengeance in late November, blanketing the land in deep snow and confining everyone largely to the ranch buildings. School was suspended during the worst weather, giving Abigail more time at home with Emma and Kieran. They spent evenings reading aloud to each other by the fire, teaching Emma to crawl across the bearskin rug, or simply talking about their hopes and plans. Abigail wrote regularly to Clara Wilkes and Helena, and a cautious friendship developed between the 2 women who had been unwittingly connected by James's deception. Clara's son, Thomas, was nearly 3, and she sent a small wooden horse for Emma at Christmas, which Kieran had crafted a special shelf to display. As the new year of 1877 dawned, Kieran formally proposed. It happened during a rare clear day when they had ventured outside to enjoy the winter sunshine. Emma, bundled against the cold, was attempting to stand in the snow with Kieran's support while Abigail watched, laughing at her daughter's determined expression. "She has your spirit," Kieran observed. "Determined, brave. And her father's charm, I'm afraid," Abigail replied, but without bitterness. She had made peace with James's memory, focusing instead on the beautiful child he had given her. "Abigail," Kieran said suddenly, "I love you. I love Emma as if she were my own. I want us to be a family officially." He reached into his pocket and produced a small box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they claimed this land. He said the pearl represented their future, something beautiful created through time and pressure." He took her gloved hand in his. "Abigail Nash, will you marry me?" Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Kieran, with all my heart, yes." They were married in the town church on a bright February morning, with Mrs. Holden holding Emma, who was now attempting her first wobbly steps. Frank stood as Kieran's best man, and to everyone's surprise, Clara Wilkes had made the journey from Helena with her son Thomas to attend the wedding, standing beside Abigail as her matron of honor. "We're sisters in a way, aren't we?" Clara had said when she arrived. "Bound by the past, but free to create our own futures." The townspeople turned out in force for the celebration, the women bringing food for a feast at the church hall, the men slapping Kieran on the back and teasing him about finally being caught. Abigail wore a new blue dress that Mrs. Holden had helped her sew, with a white lace collar that had belonged to Kieran's mother. Emma wore a matching blue ribbon in her fair hair, which was beginning to curl like her mother's. As they exchanged vows, Abigail thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the betrayal, the fear during that terrible storm. What had seemed like the worst day of her life had led her to this moment, to this man who looked at her with such genuine love and respect. "I promise to be a true and faithful husband to you, Abigail," Kieran vowed, his voice strong and clear. "And a father to Emma, to provide and protect, to cherish and respect as long as we both shall live." "I promise to be a true and faithful wife to you, Kieran," Abigail responded, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "To stand by your side through whatever life brings, to make our house a home, to love you completely, as long as we both shall live." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Kieran leaned down to kiss his bride as the congregation erupted in applause. Emma, not understanding but caught up in the excitement, clapped her small hands together and let out a happy squeal that made everyone laugh. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than the entire town could consume. As the party began to wind down, Kieran and Abigail slipped away, leaving Emma in Mrs. Holden's capable care for the night. They rode back to the ranch in a sleigh decorated with ribbons and bells, the runners gliding smoothly over the packed snow. The house had been prepared for their wedding night. A fire blazed in the bedroom fireplace, fresh linens adorned the bed, and candles cast a warm glow throughout the room that had been Kieran's alone for so long. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," Kieran said softly as he carried her over the threshold. "I've been home since the day you found us in that storm," Abigail replied, her arms around his neck. "I just didn't know it yet." Their life together settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Abigail continued teaching until late spring when she discovered she was expecting their first child. Emma, now walking confidently and beginning to speak in short sentences, was fascinated by the concept of a baby brother or sister. "Baby in there?" she would ask, patting Abigail's growing belly. "Yes, sweet one," Abigail would answer. "Your brother or sister is growing inside just like you did." Kieran expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available and increasing his cattle herd. He built a new wing onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen that made Mrs. Holden declare she'd died and gone to heaven. Their son, Robert Kieran Irwin, was born on a crisp November day in 1877, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Emma, now nearly 2, approached her baby brother with a mixture of curiosity and proprietary pride, announcing to visitors that "Bobby is my baby." As the years passed, the Circle K prospered, as did the Irwin family. 2 more children joined them, Catherine Martha in 1879 and William Frank in 1882. The town grew as well, with Abigail eventually becoming the school principal and hiring 2 additional teachers to handle the growing number of students. Clara Wilkes and her son Thomas visited every summer, and a deep friendship developed between the 2 families. Thomas and Emma shared a special bond, both understanding in some instinctive way their connection through James Norton. As they grew older, Kieran and Abigail told Emma the truth about her father, answering her questions honestly but gently. Emma accepted the complicated story with a maturity that made Abigail proud, and she grew especially close to Kieran, who had been the only father she had ever known. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran surprised Abigail with a special gift, a small silver locket with miniature portraits of their 4 children inside. "To replace the one you brought with you that stormy day," he explained. "A new beginning." Abigail touched it reverently. "It's perfect. Though I'll always keep the old one too. It reminds me of where I came from and how far we've journeyed together." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing that Kieran had built when Abigail was pregnant with Robert. The ranch was quiet, the spring air fragrant with blooming lilacs that Mrs. Holden had planted years ago. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if that storm hadn't hit when it did?" Abigail asked, her head resting on Kieran's shoulder. "If the wagon wheel hadn't broken?" Kieran's arm tightened around her. "I try not to dwell on what might have been, but I do thank God every day for guiding me to you and Emma. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "And to me," Abigail agreed. "What seemed like abandonment was actually the beginning of something beautiful. I was so afraid that day for myself, for Emma. I couldn't see how anything good could come from such a desperate situation." "Life's like that sometimes," Kieran mused. "The darkest storms can lead to the brightest days, if you just hold on long enough to see them through." Abigail smiled, thinking of the 4 healthy children sleeping inside, the prosperous ranch around them, the community they had helped build, and the love they had found in each other. From the broken wheel of an abandoned wagon to this full and joyous life, it was a journey she would never have chosen, but one for which she would be forever grateful. "I love you, Kieran Irwin," she whispered. "Through every storm, through every season, through every moment of our lives together." "And I love you, Abigail Irwin," he responded, his voice deep with emotion. "Now and always." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, so different from the storm clouds that had first brought them together, they sat in contented silence, 2 souls who had found in each other not just love, but home.